The stars looked peaceful that night. Captain Jake stood on the bridge of his ship, the USS Resolute, and watched them through the main viewing screen. The ship was small compared to the warships back on Earth. She was built for science, for exploration, for mapping distant worlds that humans might one day call home. She was not built for war. Jake had served in the fleet for 20 years. He had gray at his temples now and lines around his eyes from squinting at star charts. He was a quiet man who preferred books to battles. The crew respected him because he treated them like family. He knew every name, every birthday, every story. These 47 people had trusted him to bring them home safe. Lieutenant Commander Vance worked at the navigation console beside him. She was younger, maybe 35, with short brown hair and sharp green eyes. She had turned down command of her own vessel twice because she liked serving with Jake. They had been through a lot together. She could read his moods better than anyone. "Sensors are picking up some strange readings," said Ensign Sam Porter from his station. Sam was fresh out of the academy, barely 22. He had freckles and a nervous habit of tapping his fingers when something worried him. His fingers were tapping now. Jake walked over and looked at the screen. The readings made no sense. Space itself seemed to be bending in 7 different places, like someone was folding a piece of paper. "What am I looking at, Sam?" Jake asked. "I don't know, sir. I've never seen anything like this." Joined them, her face went pale. "I have," she said quietly. "In the classified briefings. Those are fold space signatures. Someone is about to arrive." Before Jake could respond, the universe tore itself open. 7 holes appeared in the fabric of space, each one burning with strange purple light. From those holes came ships, massive ships. Each one was at least 10 times the size of the Resolute. Their hulls were black as midnight, covered with weapons that looked like the claws of some terrible beast. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what they were looking at. The Dominion had found them. Humanity had known about them for almost 50 years. They were conquerors. They moved through the galaxy like a plague, taking everything they wanted. 37 different species had fallen to them. Some had been enslaved. Some had been wiped out completely. The lucky ones were simply absorbed into the Dominion, forced to serve their new masters. Earth had been preparing for this day. They had built warships, trained soldiers, created weapons. But the Resolute was far from home, far from any help. She was alone with 7 monsters. "Sir," said Lisa from the communications station. Lisa was in her 40s, a veteran who had seen combat before. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see her hands shaking. "We're receiving a transmission." "Put it through." The speakers crackled with static. Then a voice filled the bridge. It was cold and harsh, like metal scraping against metal. The translation software worked hard to make sense of the alien words. "Human vessel, you have 30 seconds to power down all systems and prepare for boarding. Surrender your crew for processing. Resistance will result in immediate destruction. Your time begins now." A countdown appeared on the main screen. 30 seconds, 29, 28. Jake looked around his bridge. He saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. Trust. They were waiting for him to tell them what to do. He thought about his options. They could surrender. That might keep them alive, at least for a while. They could try to run, but the enemy ships were faster. They could fight, but their weapons were designed to break apart asteroids, not punch through warship armor. 20 seconds, 19, 18. Jake said slowly, "What's the distance to the lead ship?" Checked her console. "About 8,000 kilometers, sir. Why?" "At maximum speed, how long would it take us to reach them?" The bridge went very quiet, stared at him. Her eyes widened as she understood what he was asking. "About 4 minutes, sir. Maybe 3 if Danny pushes the engines past the safety limits." 12 seconds, 11, 10. Chief Engineer Danny's voice came through the intercom. Danny was down in engineering, surrounded by the machines that kept the ship alive. He was a big man with thick arms and a loud laugh. Right now, his voice was serious. "Captain, I'm hearing some strange talk up there. You're not thinking what I think you're thinking, are you?" Jake smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "Danny, how fast can you make her go?" There was a pause. Then Danny laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had just realized he was about to do something crazy. "Captain, I can make her fly like she's never flown before, but you know she won't survive it." "I know." 5 seconds, 4, 3. Jake pressed the ship-wide intercom button. His voice reached every corner of the Resolute, from the bridge to the cargo hold, from the medical bay to the engine room. "All hands, this is your captain speaking. We have been given 30 seconds to surrender to the Dominion. They want us to kneel. They want us to beg. They want us to be afraid." He paused. The countdown reached 0. "I am not going to kneel. I am not going to beg. And I am certainly not going to be afraid. In about 4 minutes, we are going to hit that flagship at full speed. We are going to show these aliens what happens when they threaten human beings." He released the button and looked at, "Set the course." His fingers moved across her console. "Course set, Captain. All power to engines, take us in." The Resolute lurched forward. Her engines screamed with power they were never meant to produce. The stars on the viewing screen began to stretch and blur as the ship accelerated. The commander's voice returned, confused and angry. "Human vessel, you have not. Explain your actions immediately. You are ordered to stop." Jake reached over and turned off the speaker. He didn't need to hear any more. The time for talking was over. "Lisa," he said, "start recording everything. I want Earth to know what happened here. I want them to remember." Lisa nodded. Tears were running down her face, but her hands were steady now. "Recording, Captain." The Resolute flew toward the enemy fleet like an arrow. She was small and she was fragile and she had no chance of survival. But she was not going to surrender. She was going to fight. And they were about to learn something that no other species had ever taught them. Humans do not go quietly. The Resolute was never meant to be a weapon. She was born in a shipyard orbiting Mars, built by engineers who dreamed of distant stars and new discoveries. Her hull was thin because she didn't need armor. Her weapons were small because she only needed to push asteroids out of her path. She carried scientists and explorers, not soldiers. But tonight she would become something else. Tonight she would become a missile. Down in the engine room, Chief Engineer Danny was already working. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he pulled open access panels and started disconnecting safety systems. The reactor at the heart of the ship was designed to run at 60% power. Danny was about to push it to 150. His assistant, a young woman named Amy Cole, helped him work. Amy was 25 years old with oil-stained fingers and a quick mind. She had joined the fleet because she loved machines. She never imagined she would be using that love to help her ship crash into an alien warship. "Danny," she said as she handed him a tool, "are we really doing this?" Danny didn't stop working. "Looks that way, kid." "I'm scared." Danny finally paused and looked at her. His eyes were kind even now. "Me too, but I'd rather be scared and free than safe and a slave. Wouldn't you?" Amy thought about it. She thought about the stories she had heard about prisoners, the experiments, the mines, the camps. She nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said, "I would." They went back to work. On the bridge, Captain Jake watched the enemy fleet grow larger on the viewing screen. The 7 ships had spread out in a loose formation, probably preparing to surround the Resolute and force her to stop. They still didn't understand what was happening. Lieutenant Commander Vance reported from her station. 3 minutes to impact, Captain. The flagship is trying to move, but she's too big. She can't get out of our way in time." "Good, what about their weapons?" As if to answer his question, the first shots came. Bright balls of plasma screamed through space toward the Resolute. The ship shuddered as the first ones hit. Damage report, Jake ordered. Lieutenant Ben checked his screens. Ben was the damage control officer, a calm man in his 30s who never seemed to panic. Minor hull damage on decks 4 and 5, sir. Nothing critical yet. Yet, Jake repeated, he knew it would get worse, much worse. In the crew quarters, Ensign Sam Porter was helping people get to the escape pods. Not because the pods would save them, they would simply capture anyone who ejected, but because it gave people something to do, something besides wait. He found Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos kneeling by her bunk, looking at a photograph. Maria was in her late 20s with dark hair and sad eyes. The photograph showed two small children, a boy and a girl. Maria, Sam said gently, we need to move. Maria didn't look up. They're my kids and Sophia. They're back on Earth with my mother. Sam sat down next to her. They'll be proud of you. They won't even understand. They're only 5 and 7. How do you explain something like this to children? Sam didn't have an answer. He was young and had no children of his own, but he tried anyway. Maybe they won't understand now, but one day they will. One day someone will tell them the story of what we did here, and they'll know their mother was a hero. Maria finally looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but she managed a small smile. You're a good kid, Sam. She kissed the photograph, tucked it into her uniform pocket, and stood up. Okay, let's go. Back on the bridge, the situation was getting worse. The ships were firing constantly now. The Resolute twisted and turned, trying to avoid the worst of it, but she was taking hits. Alarms screamed. Smoke filled the air. The lights flickered. Deck 3 is venting atmosphere, Ben reported. Emergency bulkheads are sealing. We've lost 12 people. Jake closed his eyes for just a moment. 12 people, 12 lives, and there would be more before this was over. 2 minutes to impact, announced. Lisa was still at her communication station, still recording. She was also doing something else. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she worked to send a message through the jamming. Captain, she said, I think I can get a signal out. It won't be much, just a short burst, but Earth will receive it. Do it, Jake ordered. Tell them everything. Tell them what they are capable of. Tell them we didn't surrender. Lisa nodded and kept working. The Resolute shook violently as a plasma burst struck her port engine. Danny's voice came through the intercom, strained but still steady. Captain, we just lost engine number 2. We're down to 70% thrust. Can we still reach them? We'll reach them, just might take a little longer. Jake almost laughed. Danny was making jokes. Even now, facing death, his chief engineer was making jokes. That was the thing about humans. They found ways to smile even in the darkest moments. Another hit. This one took out the secondary sensor array. The viewing screen flickered and died, then came back on with half the resolution it had before. 1 minute to impact, said. Her voice was hoarse from smoke, but she didn't waver. Jake looked around his bridge one last time. He saw at navigation, her face lit by the glow of her screens. He saw Ben at damage control, calmly directing repair teams that both of them knew couldn't save the ship. He saw Lisa at communications, her message finally breaking through the jamming. He saw Sam, who had returned from the crew quarters to die with his captain. These were his people. These were the 47 souls who had trusted him with their lives, and now he was leading them to death. But what a death it would be! Lisa, Jake said, did the message get through? Lisa looked up with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face. Yes, sir. Earth knows. Everyone knows. Jake nodded. He reached out and pressed the shipwide intercom one final time. All hands, this is the captain. We have less than 1 minute. I want you all to know that it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you. You are the finest crew any captain could ask for, and what we are about to do will change the galaxy forever. He released the button and turned to. Take us in. The Resolute, broken and burning but still flying, made her final approach. The flagship filled the viewing screen, massive and terrible and completely unable to escape. 47 people flew toward death, and not one of them looked away. Commander had served the Dominion for 300 years. He had conquered 11 worlds. He had broken the backs of 6 different species. He had watched civilizations fall and burn, and he had felt nothing but satisfaction. The weak existed to serve the strong. This was the natural order of things. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the human ship on his tactical display. The tiny vessel was damaged, burning, falling apart, and yet it was still coming. "Why do they not stop?" he asked, his voice echoing through the massive bridge. Around him, hundreds of officers worked at their stations. They were tall and thin, with gray skin and black eyes that showed no emotion. They had been bred for war. His tactical officer, a younger named Al, checked his screens. "Commander, they are accelerating. They appear to be on a collision course with our vessel." Blinked, it was the closest thing to surprise I ever showed. "Collision course, that is suicide." "Yes, Commander." Thought about this. In his 3 centuries of service, he had seen many species try to escape. He had seen them surrender. He had seen them beg for mercy. He had never seen one charge. "They are bluffing," he decided. "They will turn away at the last moment. All batteries continue firing. Destroy them if they do not stop." The guns of the Eternal Dominion opened fire. Massive plasma cannons, each one capable of melting through a mountain, sent streams of death toward the approaching human ship. Kinetic rounds the size of small vehicles followed, spinning through the void at incredible speed. The Resolute was hit again and again. Her thin hull was torn open in a dozen places. Atmosphere rushed out into space. Fires burned in her corridors. Systems failed one after another. But she did not stop. She did not turn. She kept coming. On the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Jake held onto his command chair as the ship was torn apart around him. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead, dripping into his eyes. The smoke was so thick he could barely see. "Damage report," he called out, coughing. Ben's voice came back, strained and weak. "Captain, I've lost contact with decks 1 through 3. Engineering reports the reactor is in critical condition. We have maybe 90 seconds before it fails." "Time to impact." Vance answered. She was still at her station, still working, even though half her console was on fire. 45 seconds, sir. We'll make it." 45 seconds. Less than a minute. Jake had never thought much about how long a minute was. Now it felt like forever. "All weapons are offline," reported Lieutenant Holt from the tactical station. Was young, maybe 28, with red hair and freckles. She had joined the fleet because she wanted to protect people. Now she was about to do exactly that, in a way she never imagined. "We don't need weapons," Jake said. "We are the weapon." Another hit. This one struck the bridge directly. The ceiling collapsed, showering everyone with debris. Sam Porter was thrown from his station. He hit the wall hard and didn't move. "Sam," screamed. She started to leave her post. "Stay at navigation," Jake ordered. His voice was harsh, but he had no choice. "We need you there. Someone check on Sam." Lisa crawled across the broken deck to where Sam lay. She pressed her fingers to his neck, feeling for a pulse. After a moment, she looked up. "He's alive, Captain. Unconscious but alive." Jake felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by guilt. Sam would live for another 30 seconds. That was all he could give him. On the Eternal Dominion, Commander was starting to feel something unfamiliar. It took him a moment to recognize it. Fear. "They are not turning," Al reported, his voice rising. "Commander, they are going to hit us." "Then destroy them," roared. "All weapons maximum power." Every gun on the flagship fired at once. The barrage was devastating. The Resolute's starboard side was torn open completely. The port engine exploded, sending a massive fireball into space. The ship was dying, no question about it. But she was not dead yet. 20 seconds, reported. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful. She had accepted what was coming. Engine power is failing, Danny called from engineering. I'm giving you everything she's got, Captain, everything. Jake could hear the strain in Danny's voice. He could hear the love, too. Danny loved this ship. He had kept her running through a dozen crises, had nursed her through repairs and upgrades, had spent more hours with her engines than with any person. Now he was asking her for one last miracle. And she was giving it to him. The Resolute picked up speed. It shouldn't have been possible. Her engines were destroyed, her reactor was failing, her hull was coming apart at the seams. But somehow, impossibly, she flew faster. 10 seconds, said. Watched the human ship fill his viewport. It was small and broken and burning. It should have been nothing. It should have been easy prey. Instead, it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. All hands brace for impact, he screamed. Emergency maneuvers, turn the ship. But the Eternal Dominion was too big. She was 2 kilometers long and weighed millions of tons. She could not turn fast enough. She could not escape. 5 seconds, announced. Jake looked at his crew one last time, was smiling. Lisa was holding Sam's unconscious form, protecting him with her body. Ben was still working at damage control, trying to save a ship that was already gone. Even now, they were doing their jobs. He was so proud of them. 3 seconds. Jake reached out and took his hand. She squeezed back hard. 2 seconds. The flagship filled the entire viewing screen. Jake could see every detail of her alien hull, every weapon that had tried to kill them, every light that showed where her crew lived and worked. 1 second. For Earth, Jake said quietly. For Earth, his crew repeated. And then there was light. The Resolute struck the Eternal Dominion at 12% the speed of light. The impact was beyond anything they had ever experienced. Their shields, designed to withstand planetary bombardments, collapsed in microseconds. Their hull, built from the strongest materials in the galaxy, crumpled like wet paper. The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. A new star, brief but brilliant, bloomed in the darkness of space. When the light faded, the Eternal Dominion was gone, and with her 40,000 warriors. The 6 remaining warships hung motionless in space. Their crews stared at their sensors, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. For the first time in history, prey had killed a predator. And the galaxy would never be the same. The final seconds of the Resolute's life were the longest that any of her crew had ever experienced. Time seemed to stretch and slow, allowing each person to live a lifetime in the space of a heartbeat. Captain Jake saw everything with perfect clarity. He saw the flagship growing impossibly large on what remained of the viewing screen. He saw beside him, her hand still in his, her face calm and beautiful in the red glow of emergency lights. He saw his bridge crew, the people who had trusted him, facing their end with courage that made his heart ache. He thought about his life. He thought about the day he first joined the fleet, young and eager and full of dreams. He thought about his first command, a tiny patrol boat that barely had room for its crew. He thought about the Resolute, the ship that had become his home, carrying him through years of adventures among the stars. He thought about Earth, the blue oceans and green forests, the cities full of people living their ordinary lives, the children playing in parks, not knowing that far away, a small ship was about to change their future. And then there was no more time for thinking. The moment of impact was beyond human description. The Resolute, traveling at 12% of light speed, carried enough energy to crack a small moon. When she struck the Eternal Dominion, that energy was released in a single instant. Down in engineering, Chief Engineer Danny felt it happen. He was standing at his station, one hand on the reactor controls when the front of the ship simply ceased to exist. The metal around him turned to light. The air became fire, and then he was gone, along with everything he had ever known. Amy Cole was beside him. In her final moment, she thought of her parents back on Earth. She hoped they would understand. She hoped they would be proud. On what had been the bridge, Vance's hand tightened around Jake's. They did not let go. They held on as the deck beneath them vanished, as the stars around them disappeared, as everything they were became part of something larger. Lisa was still holding Sam Porter's unconscious form when the light took them. She had protected him until the very end, even though it could not save him. That was who she was. That was who humans were. Holt died thinking of her younger brother, who wanted to join the fleet someday. Ben died thinking of his daughter, who was only 3 years old. Maria Santos died with the photograph of her children pressed against her heart. 47 lives, 47 stories, all of them ending in the same flash of light. But their ending was also a beginning. The explosion that resulted from the impact was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Eternal Dominion, despite being one of the most powerful warships ever built, was simply erased. Her shields, which could deflect weapons that could destroy cities, failed in less than a heartbeat. Her armor, which was meters thick and forged from materials harvested from neutron stars, offered no resistance at all. The reactor at the heart of the flagship went critical. The explosion that followed the devastation 1,000 times over. Energy waves rippled outward at impossible speeds, carrying enough force to push the other warships backward through space. When the light finally faded, there was nothing left. No wreckage, no debris, no survivors. The Eternal Dominion and the Resolute had both ceased to exist, transformed into pure energy that scattered across the star system. Commander died in his command chair, still trying to give orders that no one could follow. In his final moment, he felt something he had never experienced before: respect. These humans, these small and fragile creatures, had done something that no other species had ever managed. They had made him afraid. 40,000 warriors died with him, soldiers who had conquered worlds, engineers who kept the ship running, doctors who healed the wounded. Even prisoners from conquered species, locked in the lower decks, died in the same flash of light. On the 6 surviving warships, chaos reigned. Sub-Commander had been second in command of the fleet. Now, suddenly, he was in charge. He stood on the bridge of his own ship, the Unyielding, and tried to understand what he was seeing. "Report," he demanded. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "What happened to the Eternal Dominion?" His tactical officer stared at the sensors in disbelief. "She is gone, Sub-Commander. The human vessel impacted at high velocity. Both ships were destroyed." Destroyed? The flagship was destroyed by that tiny ship. "Yes, Sub-Commander." Sat down heavily in his command chair. The Eternal Dominion had been the pride of the fleet. She had led the conquest of a dozen worlds. She was supposed to be invincible. And now she was gone, destroyed by a vessel that wasn't even designed for combat, destroyed by creatures that they had considered beneath their notice. "What do we do now?" asked one of his officers. Had no answer. For the first time in his life, he did not know what to do. Meanwhile, 3 light-years away, a communication satellite received a signal. It was weak and broken, damaged by jamming, but it was there. The satellite boosted the signal and passed it on to the next satellite in the chain, which passed it to the next, which passed it to the next. Across the vast distances of space, Lisa's final message traveled toward Earth. It carried everything: the sensor logs, the communications, the final moments of the Resolute. It carried the truth of what had happened in the 442 system. It would take 3 weeks to reach Earth. 3 weeks for the light to cross the darkness between stars. 3 weeks for humanity to learn what their explorers had done. But the message was coming, and when it arrived, everything would change. Back at the site of the battle, the 6 warships remained motionless. Their crews were in shock. Their commanders were arguing about what to do. Some wanted to continue the mission, to push on toward Earth and finish what they had started. Others wanted to retreat, to report what had happened and wait for new orders. In the end, they chose to retreat. The death of Commander had broken something in them. He had been more than just their leader. He had been a legend, a symbol of supremacy, and the humans had killed him. One by one, the warships activated their fold space drives. One by one, they disappeared, returning to territory with news that would shake the Dominion to its core. They left behind nothing but empty space and spreading energy waves. But that empty space was not really empty. It was filled with something invisible but powerful. It was filled with the echo of 47 voices, all saying the same thing. We did not surrender, we did not kneel, we chose to fight. And somewhere in the void, mixed with the atoms that had once been the Resolute, Captain Jake would have smiled. They had done it. They had shown the galaxy what humans were made of. The price had been high, the price had been everything. But it had been worth it. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning. Admiral Chris Palmer was in his office at Fleet Headquarters when his assistant burst through the door. The young man's face was pale, his hands shaking as he held out a data pad. "Sir, you need to see this. It came in from the Deep Space Relay Network. It's from the Resolute." Chris took the data pad. He had been a friend of Jake for 20 years. They had served together on 3 different ships. They had stood as best men at each other's weddings. When Jake had taken command of the Resolute, Chris had been the one to pin the captain's insignia on his collar. He pressed play. Jake's face appeared on the screen. He was covered in blood and smoke. Behind him, the bridge was on fire, but his voice was steady. "This is Captain Jake of the USS Resolute. We have encountered a fleet in the 442 system, 7 warships. They gave us 30 seconds to surrender." Jake paused. Despite everything, he smiled. "We declined. We are currently on a collision course with the enemy flagship. We will not survive, but neither will they. Tell Earth what happened here. Tell them we didn't give up. Tell them we made the bastards pay." The message ended. Chris stared at the blank screen for a long time. Then, slowly, carefully, he wiped the tears from his eyes and walked out of his office. He had work to do. 3 days later, Chris stood before the United Nations Space Council. The chamber was packed with representatives from every nation on Earth. They had all seen the message. They had all watched the sensor logs that showed the Resolute's final moments. Now they were waiting to hear what it meant. "Ladies and," Chris began, his voice rough with emotion. 3 weeks ago, the USS Resolute and her crew of 47 were lost in the 442 system. They died in combat with a fleet. He paused, letting the words sink in. But they did not die as victims. They died as warriors. When given the choice between surrender and death, they chose a third option. They chose to fight. He pressed a button and a holographic display appeared behind him. It showed the moment of impact, reconstructed from the sensor data. The tiny Resolute, barely visible against the massive bulk of the flagship, the flash of light, the spreading wave of destruction. The Resolute destroyed the Eternal Dominion, the most powerful warship in the fleet. She killed their supreme military commander and 40,000 of their best warriors. She proved that they can be hurt. The chamber was absolutely silent. Intelligence reports indicate that the Dominion is in chaos. For the first time in their history, they have lost a flagship. For the first time, they have faced an enemy that refused to surrender. They are afraid. Chris stepped forward, his eyes scanning the faces of the representatives. "I won't pretend this changes everything. They are still powerful. They still have hundreds of ships and millions of soldiers. War is coming and it will be hard. But Captain and his crew have given us something precious. They have given us hope. They have shown the galaxy that humans do not kneel." He straightened his uniform and lifted his chin. "I propose that we honor their sacrifice. I propose that we build a memorial right here on Earth, where their names will be carved in stone forever. I propose that we name our next warship the USS, so that Jake's spirit can continue to fight. And I propose that we send a message to every corner of the galaxy, to every species living under rule." He smiled, and it was the same smile that Jake had worn in his final moments. "The message is simple: we don't surrender, and neither should you." The vote was unanimous. 6 months later, the first signs of the Resolute's legacy began to appear. On a planet called Ra, a species that had been conquered by the 50 years ago heard the story of the human ship. They heard how 47 people had faced an entire fleet and refused to kneel. They started asking questions. Why did they serve the Dominion? Why did they accept their chains? They were powerful, yes, but they could be hurt. The humans had proven that. The rebellion started small. A single factory that refused to work. A group of slaves who escaped into the wilderness. A protest in the capital city. They sent soldiers to crush them, but the rebels had learned from the humans. They did not surrender. They did not beg for mercy. They fought. And they won. Within a year, Ra was free. Other worlds followed. The Dominion, which had seemed so unshakable, began to crack. Species that had been slaves for generations rose up and demanded their freedom. When asked why they were fighting, they all gave the same answer: because the humans showed us how. Back on Earth, the memorial was completed. It stood on a hill overlooking the ocean, a simple stone wall with 47 names carved into it. At the top, in letters larger than the rest, were the words that Lisa had sent in her final message. They asked us to kneel, we chose to fly. Every year, on the anniversary of the Resolute's last flight, thousands of people came to the memorial. They left flowers and letters. They read the names aloud. They told their children the story of Captain Jake and his crew. The children listened with wide eyes. They heard about Vance, who had set the course and never wavered. They heard about Danny, who had pushed the engines beyond their limits. They heard about Lisa, who had sent the message that changed everything. And they asked their parents the same question, again and again. Were they scared? The parents always gave the same answer. Yes, they were scared, but they were also brave. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. The children nodded seriously. They understood in the way that children understand important things. 20 years after the Resolute's sacrifice, the war with the finally ended. The Dominion, weakened by endless rebellions and internal conflicts, agreed to a peace treaty. They released all their slaves. They gave up their conquered worlds. They retreated to their home system, a shadow of what they had once been. The treaty was signed on the anniversary of the Resolute's last flight. It was not a coincidence. Admiral Chris Palmer, now old and gray but still standing straight, watched the signing ceremony from his seat of honor. He thought about Jake, his old friend. He thought about all the lives that had been saved because 47 people had refused to kneel. The galaxy was free. The chains were broken. And it had all started with one small ship and 30 seconds that changed everything. As the ceremony ended, Chris walked alone to a window that looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, scattered across the 442 system, were the atoms that had once been the Resolute. They were part of the universe now, mixed with the stardust and cosmic radiation that filled all of space. Chris raised his hand in a salute. "We did it, Jake," he said quietly. "We won because of you." He stood there for a long time, watching the stars. Then he lowered his hand, turned away, and walked back to join the living. But he never forgot. None of them ever forgot. And far away, in the depths of space, the echo of 47 voices still whispered their eternal message. We did not surrender, we did not kneel, we chose to fly. Forever and always, we chose to fly.